In case you haven't heard, today is Alien Day. It's the one day of the year where having awful chest pains doesn't necessarily mean you're having a heart attack. Today is the day where we not only celebrate Ridley Scott's seminal movie, but also the iconic designs by famed artist H.R. Giger. It's a look and style that continues to both fascinate and haunt people to this very day, some 45 years after Alien first came out. But instead of talking about that incredible movie, I instead want to talk about the many games that blatantly ripped it off. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, you saw some of the biggest franchises pay homage to H.R. Giger's incredible designs. Or maybe they just copied him. Either way, we're going to look at some of the best examples of this happening. From fake face huggers to wannabe Xenomorphs, this is a brief history of video games stealing from aliens. Our journey begins in 1980, a year after Ridley Scott introduced the world to LV-426 and the crew of the Nostromo. By this point in history, Alien had grossed more than $60 million at the box office and was a massive international hit. So, when Bally went to draw an alien for their Space Invaders pinball table, it's clear that they still had H.R. Giger on the mind. This is easily one of the most blatant Alien ripoffs. But as you'll soon discover, it's far from the only one. After Bally tested the boundaries of copyright infringement, there was a lull in Xenomorph copycats. It really wasn't until 1986 when James Cameron gave the series new life with his incredible follow-up Aliens. This is where you begin to see a big wave of wannabes, starting with one of my all-time favorites, the Dobkeratops, from the 1987 shoot-'em-up R-Type. In fact, this whole game, and the series for that matter, is littered with a bunch of subtle and obvious nods to H.R. Giger. In the same year as R-Type, you also had Alien Syndrome, which featured these alien characters right from the top. This is also one of the many games that not only featured a fake Xenomorph in the game, but also on the front cover. Yeah, you're gonna see a lot of that going forward. Including our next game, the 1988 classic Contra. Right off the bat, you have a cover that's just clearly a mashup of Arnold Schwarzenegger from Predator and Sylvester Stallone as Rambo, all with the Xenomorph getting ready to pounce on him from behind. Of course, there are connections inside the game too. For example, towards the end, you fight this long-headed creature, and in the recent remake, Operation Galuga, the Contra team runs into a bunch of face huggers, which is just one of the many references to aliens. Speaking of aliens that are both in the game and on the cover, let me introduce you to Xenophobe. This unusual multiplayer game features an alien that may not be an exact duplicate of the movie Monster, but clearly took inspiration. It's even more obvious when you look at the cover art, which is just unmistakable. Alien Crush is one of those games that basically just cribs from the H.R. Giger style book. The whole design of the pinball table has little nods to Alien, but my favorite are these mouths that come out of the sides. By 1989, you started to see wannabe Xenomorphs pop up in places that you just wouldn't expect. A great example of that is Ninja Gaiden, which certainly doesn't set itself up as a game filled with aliens. But if you're one of those crazy people that battled their way to the very end, then you already know that an eclipse ushered in this Giger-inspired demon. Another place you might not expect to see a Xenomorph is Mystic Defender, which has a whole level that basically just copies and pastes elements from the Giger tile catalog. The stage even includes this fire-spitting alien head. Weird. Now, before we leave 1989, let's take a look at what could have been. Although it's not in the actual game, the pre-released build of Monster Party on the Nintendo Entertainment System had a section with this fake Xenomorph. 1990 brought us alien references in two different arcade games. The first was the Astyanax, which goes from a pretty straightforward Rastan-inspired fantasy game to an H.R. Giger nightmare. The entire final stage basically uses the Alien Guide to Decoration to create a very familiar looking level. It even ends with a boss that looks almost exactly like a Xenomorph. What are we doing here? Our next game is Space Gun, a 1990 light gun game with a cool science fiction setting. Unfortunately, they couldn't help themselves and added a bunch of alien eggs to the backgrounds and populated later stages with these Xenomorph-inspired bad guys. Dark Seed is one of those games where the alien influence sneaks up on you. For a long time, this memorable point-and-clicker is pretty straightforward. However, towards the end, it sends you into a nightmare world filled with Giger-inspired artwork. Much like the Astyanax, it's a massive shift in both look and tone, and you probably won't be too surprised to learn that something similar happens in the sequel. Now, if we're talking about games with alien-inspired levels, then you can't ignore Streets of Rage 2. Unlike most of the games on this list, this oddball stage actually makes sense in context, as it's part of a carnival ride that our heroes have to fight through. The game resists having us fight full-grown Xenomorphs, but you can see the silhouettes of tiny aliens in those eggs. Speaking of sequels, Splatterhouse 2 is one of the few times when the alien is on the cover, but not in the actual game. That's sad, that is very obviously a Xenomorph on the cover, there's just no doubt about it. Apparently, those pesky aliens have been living in the sewers of New York City. At least, that's what I learned when I played Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 Turtles in Time on the Super NES. Hey, have you ever wanted to see Popeye fight a Xenomorph? Well, get ready to see the ultimate showdown when you play Popeye 3 WrestleCrazy on the Commodore 64 or ZX Spectrum. Look, I'm gonna admit, this is a weird one. Speaking of weird, did you know that Ecco the Dolphin ends with a big science fiction finale? Believe it or not, the game actually ends with our hero fighting a massive alien head. No, I'm not joking. Alright, it won't surprise anybody when I say that the Metroid series owes a lot to Alien. There's a list out there linking the two sci-fi properties that's just a mile long, including everything from names to facehuggers to the design of the statues. The most obvious connection is Ridley, a villain that not only bears a close resemblance to a Xenomorph, but also seems to be named after the director of the first Alien movie. Honestly, I could have featured this earlier in the list, but I think we can all agree that it really came into its own in Super Metroid. Mega Turrican is another one of those games where there's an alien-inspired stage that seemingly comes out of nowhere. This one features not just the iconic eggs, but also little dog-sized Xenomorphs, similar to what you saw in Alien 3. Well, not exactly a full-on ripoff. Beyond Oasis does see our hero battling what looks like an alien head, complete with one of those mouths inside of a mouth. Yeah, it's horrifying, but it is a cool design for a fantasy adventure game. As we got further and further away from the good Alien movies, we ended up seeing fewer examples of fake Xenomorphs. However, that did not stop Konami from using Giger's design in a really interesting way. If you look closely while playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night, you'll notice some familiar faces in Dracula's throne. What a crazy boss design this was. And finally, I want to end our journey with one of my favorite Alien send-ups, which can be found in Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now, to be fair, this is more of a parody than a ripoff, but it's great nonetheless. It involves Conker fighting a Xenomorph in one of those metal suits from Aliens. The goal is to throw the boss out of the ship and into space, which is proving to be a lot harder than expected. And just when it looks like our hero is going to be clobbered by an alien, it freezes in midair. It's just stuck that way, much to Conker's confusion. As it turns out, the game locked up. After breaking the fourth wall and teaming up with a game developer, he chooses a weapon, and then he returns to the game in order to decapitate the Xenomorph. Yeah, he'll clean that up later. The game ultimately ends with another movie reference, A Clockwork Orange. However, we'll talk about that when Alex and his droogs are given their own special holiday. For now, I just want to say Happy Alien Day. Or is it Merry Alien Day? Ugh, who cares? Hey, thanks for watching me take a trip through these classic games. Obviously, there are more examples out there, including a bunch of games that were only released in Europe and Japan. I wanted to be as comprehensive as possible, but there are just so many more out there. And that brings me to today's question. What is your favorite Alien ripoff? And also, what did I miss? There's some really good ones here, and I'm excited to see your picks in the comments below. In other news, today is my birthday. That's right, I share a birthday with Alien Day. As such, I'm probably drunk or passed out when you're watching this, or maybe both if I'm lucky. We'll be back next week, so while you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,